the British Prime Minister said, we are going to commit to the defence of Ukraine with boots on the ground and planes in the air. But that's the great headline. And then behind it always is in brackets and sotto voce, but only if the Yanks are going to commit as well. And if they're not, we're probably not.
Now, as we said earlier on, European leaders have been meeting in Paris today and online as part of the Coalition of the Willing conversations and talks. Hosting that event, President Macron, who co-hosted alongside Keir Starmer online, he announced in the next few days there'd be details of American security guarantees. They would be finalised. I wonder, will we actually see? We can talk first of all to Tim Marshall, who is the author and analyst and the author of Prisoners of Geography. Hello to you, Tim.
Hello there, John.
Hi. Where do you think we've got to, Tim, in this pretty, I know I've nearly said exhaustive, but I should say exhausting process of putting together a plan to help Ukraine guard a peace as and when it comes?
It's a bit of a diplomatic dance, isn't it? I think it's possible we are slightly incrementally advancing towards a genuine coalition of the willing, but it's a bit of a circular debate in that the coalition of the willing will be willing if the Americans are. And we don't know yet how the Americans are willing, and therefore we don't know who within the coalition of the willing is willing. Yes. I'll stop saying willing now, John, because I think you've got the point. But when I said I think it's incremental, that is because both of tone and language. The French have been saying very clearly, they even have a little phrase, nous sommes prêts, we are ready. And the Quai d'Orsay, the French Foreign Ministry, has been putting this out for days now. And when you add that to what the Defence Secretary John Healey was saying and other countries, it does seem that they have put together some sort of commitment to some sort of military activity. And so that's the technical military side of it. So what we now have to wait for is the legal and diplomatic side of it.
Yes. I've been seeing I don't know, a stream, a bit of a trickle of reports in the American and the British press suggesting that the coalition partners between them have put together some form of plan, perhaps in some detail. But that crucial element, the American element, offering some sort of guarantee of support, that just seems so very vague. When Donald Trump is asked about it, he's incredibly vague. And the team around him, when they're asked about it, well, all you get is that they're talking about, if they are talking about anything, something pretty minimal.
Yeah, well, I'm comforted by your maybes and possiblies because, that's exactly where I am on it. And, is it possible that the Europeans are talking tough with the expectation that they'll then have to say, well, we want it to be tough, but the Americans wouldn't back it, and so we can't do it either? I don't know. But with that, this is unfortunately why we have to wait. Witkoff, the US I suppose he's a diplomat now. I think he's still more of a businessman than a diplomat. Trump's envoy, he was there, but he only went to the meeting for 20 minutes and then he wandered off. Not quite sure why. So I'm afraid we just have to wait now to see what Trump comes up with, probably at some point next week, in which he says, right, the United States will do X. Now, I'm almost certain he will not say, the Marine Corps is about to deploy 20,000 troops into Ukraine. No. But he may be able to, and this is a big maybe, say something like, we're going to put 40 fighter jets into Romania and Poland, deployed to stand by and to back up the Europeans. Now, that might give them enough spine, the Europeans, to then actually say what it is that they're going to do. I listened to Macron's press conference, finished about half an hour ago, and he was asked a couple of times, how many troops, who? And he was so vague, and I think this is a get out. He said, I'm not going to tell you what because the Russians are listening.
Yes.
That's not good enough, John. I mean, we all know that the Brits and the French are the only two countries probably even prepared to say that they might put troops on the ground. And even then, it would only be in the tens of thousands and they would struggle to do it. So we've got to get more detail.
I suppose, Tim, you could argue that it would make a certain sense for leaders like Macron and Starmer to be rather vague until they have established just how much America is prepared to commit. Because if they say, "Look, we're ready to go. Here's the plan," then Donald Trump would pretty much just walk away from the field, to the extent that he's even committed at the moment. But can we, Tim? maybe glean some of the outline of the thinking behind the plan in its formation. For one thing, when it comes to the, what is now the front line, and then would become, when peace comes along, a line of contact with maybe a buffer zone, that's going to be up to Ukrainian troops, not anyone else. And the coalition troops, which would, one presumes, include British and French troops, they would be much further back, maybe in the west of the country, away from that line of contact, training and doing that sort of work and that sort of support work. Those are basic elements, but it's a reasonable assumption.
I think you're right. Tens of thousands at best from probably only two countries. Other European countries perhaps contributing also to some sort of air cover outside and some sort of sea cover outside. But again, everything predicated on the Americans being able to back them up. Because unless the Americans are going to put things quite robustly, all the Americans would really be there was to use their heavy lift capability to get us out of the way if shooting started again. So, I don't yet see this as anything that Putin has got to be frightened of. I went back this afternoon and looked at all the different times Mr. Starmer has been promising to help. And I take your point, John, about, they have to give themselves some flexibility. But it was February when the British Prime Minister said, we are going to commit to the defence of Ukraine with boots on the ground and planes in the air. But that's the great headline. And then behind it always is in brackets and sotto voce, but only if the Yanks are going to commit as well. And if they're not, we're probably not.
And there is, isn't there, still a great big question mark when it comes to the deployment of British troops, British boots on the ground, French boots on the ground, whoever chooses to add to that force. And some of the NATO countries are willing to add limited forces too, and that is the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
If the Russians advance over that line when peace comes and again threaten Ukrainian territory and again presumably engage with Ukrainian troops, would British soldiers join in the fight? And that's not at all clear at this point, is it, Sam?
No, it's not. And that's what I meant, John, at the beginning, in my first answer, when I talked about, I think it's an incremental advance insofar as it does look like some of the logistics and in private, some of the numbers that would be involved have been clarified privately. But that there's no clarification on the legal and diplomatic side of it. And you're right. What are the rules of engagement? If the Russians send a hypersonic missile at a Polish base near the a Ukrainian base near the Polish border, near Lviv, for example, where there's 1,000 British troops training Ukrainian troops and kill 60 of them, what does that mean? Is Britain now militarily involved, or do we just then quickly get out the way? And, we both have sympathy for the politicians who have to leave some of their options open. But we are talking about the nation state of the United Kingdom potentially getting involved. And I think we are getting very close to the idea that if you're going to do this, we need to be told and have the conversation about British troops going into danger.
Yes, and just lastly, that does raise, doesn't it? I want to get into this in the programme just a little bit later on, a huge question of principle, which is, it's all very well to look for the size of force with American backing, which would act as an absolute deterrent to Russian aggression. That would be the absolute ideal. But anyway, short of that, it is about testing, let's say, Keir Starmer, because he's one of their rhetoric when he says Ukraine's fight is our fight, that Ukraine's freedom is our freedom. And that may involve that ultimate decision in advance of aggression to say, we will tell Vladimir Putin, you cross that line and we will be at war with you. And not just leaving it to him to call the terms with his sabre rattling. Are we willing to back up our own rhetoric? And more fundamentally, does our own freedom as we describe it, how much does it matter to us? I mean, that's a huge question.
I think it's a generational challenge, John, because, we might think of it as a faraway country about which we know little, which older listeners who know their history will remember what was said about Czechoslovakia before the Second World War. I'm not putting it quite in such stark terms, but, are you a country that is prepared to stand up for democracy and freedom in Europe, or are you not? If you say you are and then you don't do anything because your big brother in America won't help you, what signals are you sending? So I'm not trying to make a case for or against, but I do think these are the stakes that we're playing for.
Yeah, and that is the big question of principle, which I want to discuss a little bit later on. As always, Tim, a real pleasure to talk
Thank
some
you.
of these things through with you.